Hello. So let's start. Thank you, Maxime, for the introduction. Thank you for being here. And my name is Marco. I'm Italian. And I'm based in Barcelona. This is my first time here at the headquarters. Amazing, amazing. I work in Nov.2023, as you can see. I love it. It is cold here, I have to say. But let's talk about the presentation today. We talk about how N26 migrated to SwiftUI. We will see the motivations behind this decision, how we did it in terms of process, technical things, limitations, challenges, and the opportunities that opened up to us during this transition. First, I want to know a little bit about you, the audience, that are quiet audience. Raise your hand if you are using SwiftUI. Quite a lot, quite a lot. And did you work on the migration from UIKit, or did you start with SwiftUI? Raise your hand if you work on the migration. Okay, was it hard? It was hard, yeah. Let's see how it worked out for us at N26. First off, a little bit about my team and the design system at N26. It is called NXD. And what is it? What is a design system? What do we do? As a design system, we want to ensure consistency across the platforms and across the entire iOS apps by providing fundamentals that are shared across the platforms, and reusable components, patterns, guidelines, documentation. We want our engineers and designers to reduce friction and effort and time when it comes to implementing UI, so that they can focus on the feature that they are working on, and ideally reduce the friction in the handoff process between designers and engineers. And this is the point that I like most. It's about the developer experience. I do believe that the design system, as a member of this team, we do have a responsibility in this sense. And we can enhance developer experience by providing tools for the onboarding, guidelines, and documentation, but also by adopting the latest APIs and the latest UI framework. Everyone is excited after WWDC, and of course, we want to enhance our colleagues' experience. So why did we migrate to SwiftUI? I could tell Apple told us at WWDC 2022. This is a super famous screenshot in the social, if you remember. However, this is not the entire quote by Josh Scheffer, because what he said is that if you are new to our platforms, the best way to build an app is with SwiftUI. N26 is not new. N26 is on the App Store since 2015, basically 1 year after Swift was released, meaning that we went through the entire eras of zip files, storyboards, layout, programmatic UI, and all the evolution of UIKit with the design system that was built during years. So, why? And I'm asking this question because migrating to SwiftUI, a relatively new framework, has a cost. As a cost for the engineers that have to learn a new framework, implement it, and for the other engineers that have to adopt it, there is a learning curve to understand this, a mindset shift, no? Every thinking. Let's take a step back. Let's see what we already had in place. Few slides on that, and then we dive into SwiftUI. So in 2019, when SwiftUI was released, we were supporting iOS 11. And a group of engineers had this idea to create a framework on top of UIKit as a declarative framework. So yeah, it's going to be amazing. Let's facilitate the migration to SwiftUI in the future by providing a similar code style, a declarative code style, and by abstracting all the complexity of UIKit in facade interfaces. It was a small project, but all the engineers loved it in our community and started using it. I call it UIKit pretending to be SwiftUI. So this is a screen in our app. the My Account screen. And here, I'm going to move on the other side, is how you implement it in NXD. If you use SwiftUI, and a lot of you use SwiftUI, may recognize something in the code style. It's pretty similar. And again, all of these are just facade, meaning that the complexity is in the backing view. And most of the time, I'm not going to go into details, but just to give an idea, most of the time, engineers don't even have to know about this, right? They just use it. They don't have to know about the UI view subclass and all the configuration of them. The most important thing that I learned in my time in the design system is that it is dynamic. It changes over time, every day, to cover new use cases, new products, new features, and also to reiterate what you already implemented. So as an engineer, I want to accommodate these changes. I want to be open for extensions. Here is a pretty simple component, a section header is a typography component, and with time, we added an accessory. So great. Of course, we want it to be accessible. We added another button. And then we want to have control on the appearance and the padding and the number of lines. And here it is how we created a monster. It is hard to read, hard to maintain, hard to test. And the reason why this happened, and we have a lot of views like that, right, in this framework, is because NXD framework in UIKit was never supposed to fully replace SwiftUI. It was just an idea to learn a little bit how to use the declarative approach. So why do you migrate to SwiftUI? We wanted to take advantage of the composability approach with SwiftUI, modifiers, opaque type, environment values, all the limitations that the framework had, basically. And the timing was perfect because we were releasing a new version of the design system. And most importantly, we were updating the minimum deployment target from iOS 12 to iOS 14. And this gave us the opportunity to not only use SwiftUI in an easy way on production, but also not the very first version in iOS 13. So this happened in Q2, March, more or less, and the decision was made last year around December. So we had a window to get ready. This is the juicy part. How do we do that? So we took this opportunity to refactor fundamentals. If you don't know about fundamentals, if you don't have design system in your product, in your company, it's basically a set of tokens, constant about typography, iconography, color, spacing, that are the basic block at the foundation of the UI components of our design library. And of course, we took this opportunity to maybe revisit something that we could improve. Basically, there was some YAM here. I took some YAM. This is good because we could tackle tech debt, which is a thing in, as a developer. We want to tackle tech debt. So what we did here, few examples. The library was introduced before dark mode, and we really overcomplicated how to deal with dark mode. It was about observer pattern and dynamically assign the assets. Of course, we simplified this a lot, and we made everything more testable with the Casey Terrible enums. What really changed our implementation phase was the work group. And I'm not saying that because there are a lot of colleagues in here, but it was great because we could learn from the others. Again, SwiftUI is new, it's a new framework, so it's not like we're already new in the team, in the design system. So we could leverage the different opinions and background on SwiftUI in the big community that we have at 1026. Let's go in the technical part. What did we learn? I had to mention environment values. If you don't know, but most of you know, what is environment values, this is how Apple describes it. And it's basically a way from an outer level of the view hierarchy to be able to set some properties that are a lot of built-in environment values, so that the views, the children, can adapt their appearance and or behavior based on this environment. We have 44 already custom environment values in our library, and this is going to grow for sure. We mainly use it for typography, for styling, like the cell, that is one of the most important components in our library, and for doing cool stuff, like, for instance, we can define how a button grows horizontally inside, the label inside a button grows horizontally, and we can define that at any level of the view hierarchy. It's super cool. If you're new, if you didn't use SwiftUI, seems abstract, but I'm going to show you some examples. So how did it have an impact on our library? Let's see an example. Here is a list of typography components in our UI kit library. There are a lot, and they diverge in terms of padding, typography style. Some of them have accessory subviews. And here is a list of typography components in SwiftUI. So why? Why so easy? Of course, thanks to the environment values. And having just one view means much less line of code, easy to maintain, easy to test. And as I mentioned before, we can compose it, right? We can compose this single view with modifiers. And what are these modifiers? I didn't mention before. In this example, these modifiers are an elegant way to basically set up the environment values. I'm going to move also on the other side so that you can see. It's pretty simple. So since I'm sharing this snippet, let's focus on these modifiers. Why? If you know about SwiftUI, you can set a font with a modifier, which is font. And you can also set the text color with a modifier for iOS 14, which is foreground color. So why did we do that? We want you to take advantage of the compiler and the fact that Swift is type-safe language, so that our engineers could use only the fundamentals of the design system, meaning not any font is valid, but the typography style that we provide in the design system. Not any color, but the color that we provide in our palette. Another reason why this is good is because we don't want our engineers to learn upfront by heart all the modifiers that we provide. Is a lot, it's impossible. So we want to take advantage of the fact that text code has the auto-completion, and we use this NXD prefix. So this emerged during the workgroup collaboration phase, and together with the other fundings that I cannot go in details, otherwise this is going to last like 5 days. I will mention the preference key later, though. And things in this list, there are cool stuff like toggle style, button style, or how we do our shimmering, reduction, custom appearance. The next phase is the adoption. It's still in progress. We facilitated adoption with the iOS knowledge share session based on SwiftUI, and having the workgroup people, so the participants to the workgroup activity, are already onboarded, so they could advocate for SwiftUI, reducing, again, the learning curve for the engineers. And we also provided a tool, the Glossary app. It was already available in 2019, so much before this migration, and it's distributed via test flight internally so that our engineers, designers, QA, everyone that is interested in NXT can install on their iPhones. We rebuilt it in SwiftUI. So keep in mind that we were doing this before updating the minimum deployment target, meaning that this was a great opportunity to see our components in actions, right? Since we were there, we implemented other features like the previews, and the only one that I want to stress is the interactive playground. So I mentioned before the environment values, the modifiers, which seems abstract, mainly coming from UI kit. And this is a practical way to see how it works. You can go in details of any view, and basically, with these settings, drop-down approach, these are just the modifiers. These are just the environment values. And you can see how the component adapts accordingly. Pretty cool. I implemented it. So, of course, everything seems good, but adopting SwiftUI comes with challenges, mainly when you target iOS 14. The first one is represented by the fact that SwiftUI is evolving. over time. It's a new framework. So we were targeting iOS 14 this year, and a few months later, Apple announced iOS 17 APIs, of course. So we could learn from iOS 15, iOS 16, iOS 17, and how the framework is evolving, and most importantly, what didn't work out at first glance, like the navigation API, right? These were completely not cool, and they were replaced with the navigation path API, which are much more structured. But we were targeting iOS 14, so what we could learn from the future was to not use this, right? Didn't make sense. So we didn't use navigation in SwiftUI. That was also beneficial for our migration phase because it simplified a lot, because in our architectures, the routing didn't have to change. We didn't have to apply any change because we were encapsulating our SwiftUI view in a custom SwiftUI UI hosting controller, so a subclass. Still, we wanted to give to our engineers a SwiftUI-ish way to deal with navigation bar, left items, right items, navigation title. So, oops. So this is an example, right? I mentioned before, the preference key. Another thing that we learn how to use, and this is a pretty cool example. The main challenge, however, is represented by the things that are not available in iOS 14. So I'm talking of unavailable APIs like pull to refresh, swipe actions, or sync image components. Since we were also adopting SwiftUI and async await, the task modifier, and even crazier modifiers, such as programmatically focus on a text field, or controlling the on some bit action, or hiding the separator from a list. It's not possible in iOS 14, it's crazy. So most of the time, including the separator, we found a workaround in SwiftUI natively. Sometimes good workarounds, sometimes ugly workarounds. And fortunately, Apple, since day one, gave us this protocol. UI view representable, or UI view controller representable. If you're new to SwiftUI, this is a protocol that basically is a bridge to UI view-based component to SwiftUI. So the reason why I'm quoting Homer Simpson here is because this is tempting. The idea to just map all the components from UIKit to SwiftUI, reduce time, reduce friction, is tempting. You can reduce time and effort, right? However, besides the layout issues that emerge when you do that because of the intrinsic content size, you definitely want to explore the capabilities of SwiftUI entirely. I showed you before the typography components, which is a great example for us because we could have mapped all those components. Instead, we came up with just one component. It's much better for us. Still, we use UI view representable sometimes, right? The best example is a text field. I mentioned before, there are too many limitations. Focus, but also appearance. You cannot customize the border, the offset of the placeholder, and stuff like that. So yeah, we fall back to UIKit. It's pretty cool. And the reason why this is a crazy view with a lot of environment values is because this is internal, and we use it to represent all the text fields in our NXD UI in SwiftUI library. Another example, which is easier to read, is the segmented control. You may know it is possible to represent it natively in SwiftUI. It's a picker with the segmented style, but still, too many limitations in terms of UI, and we need it. So we fall back to UIKit again. During my talk, I mentioned a lot of time the word opportunities. Opportunity to refactor fundamentals, to tackle tech debt, to revisiting how we implemented some views like typography. And here is a quote by Tony Fadell. You are defined by what you do, but also by what you don't do. And we definitely didn't want to be defined by skipping accessibility support. mainly when it is easy to support accessibility in SwiftUI. Here is a list of modifiers, available in iOS 14. And in iOS 15, we could be able to use also this other modifier. I'm not going into details about that, don't worry, but I still provide you 2 examples of accessibility and how we, in the design system, improve the way we were shipping fully accessible components in SwiftUI. Disclaimer, in UIKit, we didn't do a great job. I admit that in the design system, not all the components that we deliver to our engineers are accessible, meaning that we don't help them to implement accessible features. These had to change. Great opportunity with SwiftUI. Example, this is a super famous screen in our app, the Spotlight. It's also a great opportunity to talk about Moneybeam. But yeah, okay, this is a screen that is split in top section and the bottom section. And in SwiftUI, you build it more or less like that. Simplified version, you can focus on the overlay modifier, right? Meaning that the CTA here come before, in the view hierarchy, come before the content. As a consequence of that, VoiceOver will read the CTA first and then the content. Doesn't sound good. One line, and we fix this. So modifiers in SwiftUI can help us. Last example, and I really care about this one, so focus. This is segmented control example, this component, right? I mentioned before, we did it in UIKit using UID representable. So the reason why I want to share this example is because when we talk about accessibility, we often hear things like, okay, but we need to hire an accessibility engineer, right? We need to outsource, we need workshops, user research, user testing. And all of these are great ideas, but sometimes not practical. And as an iOS engineer that has never been formally trained on accessibility, the least I could do was to learn from Apple, learn from SwiftUI in this example. Let's see how. When we in NXD proposed this initializer to our engineers, I remember some of them were confused. Like, okay, Marco, but why this accessibility label? Can it be optional? Default value nil? Can I pass an empty string here? So I said that in SwiftUI, you can build it natively. And let's focus on that label, that string, right? In SwiftUI, this string sometimes is visible, and depending on the platform, but you can hide it explicitly using the labels hidden modifier. And in the documentation, Apple say to always provide a label for controls, even when you hide them, because SwiftUI is gonna use this label for accessibility, VoiceOver, voice control. So we did the same. We just learned from Apple. We have this label, and under the hood, NXD will apply the label to the component. And this is just an example, but there are much more, like the custom disclosure group that we have. Great. So let's wrap up. We went to the motivations and the starting point, and how we implemented it. It was, of course, just a little touch in the surface, but let's connect later if you have questions or during the Q&A, and the opportunities. Again, tech debt, refactoring, fundamentals, and accessibility. I couldn't mention because of time a lot of things that I wanted to, like how do we test this? How do we leverage SwiftUI previews? And of course, what's next with iOS 15? So thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Marco. Any questions? Raise your hand. Hi, I have a couple of questions. One is about the performance of the app. You know this was coming. How did you measure it? And were during this process afraid that, I don't know, something could go wrong and you stumble on some very high performance problems?
I first answered it because you said two questions. So I'm gonna, is the two, you already provided
No,
the
I can
question,
say
right?
the
Okay,
other
how
one
do you
too,
do
yeah.
that and that? Okay, good question. So no, this is a good question. And I'm gonna answer it by saying first that this is a banking app, right? So we definitely don't want to mess up, and there are some QE here in the room. So when we migrate to a new framework, I remember at the beginning, we decided to go with the feature flag first. And the reason why I say that, I'm not going to talk about performance specifically, but I'm going to mention that one of the main challenge for us was to notice how the components change based on the OS in SwiftUI, which is new, was completely new for us. The appearance and the performance example is the list. The only benchmark that we did was between list and scroll view with a lazy V stack. And yeah, we should use list, which comes with pretty limited UI for iOS 14. And it was a challenge to try to understand how to remove this separator, because we design it in a different way. So the trade-off between performance and appearance for us falls to performance, of course. So the combination of the two things worked, because with some benchmark on specific use cases, and plus the feature flag approach, work out for us. And now we have a lot of screens already migrated, and we don't use this feature flag approach anymore. It is pretty much stable. Sometimes something emerges, like, hey, with iOS 17.1.1, this segmented control is different. And then we have to take some measures for that. It's challenging, as I mentioned, but it's feasible.
Yeah, my second question is about accessibility. And I'm curious to know if you also support dynamic fonts or in this accessibility work you're doing.
Yeah, dynamic type is definitely something that we need to support, right? So what we did, super quick answer from the technical point of view, the switch from UI kit to SwiftUI is that now all the typography component supports dynamic type by default. So from our side, it's perfect. They work, they are perfect, they change size. Of course, it has a consequence that we need to learn how to take care of the different layout and how to ideally, how do you say, make it easier for the engineers for the designers to see how the components might not be perfect for our dynamic type fonts. And some example is the cell component that I mentioned. Of course, it resizes automatically, so not great, not a big issue. I'm not going to spoil that. And other examples are the spinner. We have a component which is a ring with the font inside, with the text inside, and the ring is fixed. In that case, of course, we don't want the dynamic type to work, to support dynamic type, as long as the information that is there is not valid, right? So sometimes it's just a decorative text. So we can come to a trade-off and say, okay, this text will not change the size because the ring is fixed. But all of these things that I'm mentioning now are new to us because we are changing this. We are thinking of it now. So we need to define it, document it. I like that you asked this question. With SwiftUI, supporting dynamic type is a default behavior, right? And one last thing, they don't know, some engineers, what we did at the end, we implemented a custom environment value to disable the dynamic type support to cover such cases. But I didn't sponsor that because I don't want them to use it, right? So next.
Do you use multiple view builders based on the OS in order to fix your issues?
Just today I was talking with a colleague about that, the if modifier, the famous if modifier, right? This is what you ask, right?
Yeah, like if you have a different view builder for iOS 15 and up.
Ah,
iOS 14,
okay,
for
no.
example,
Okay,
and
now I
add-
got it. Now I got it. Okay, so we don't use availability checks API usually in our app because it makes hard to test, right? However, now we are gonna have a case in the design system with that, and it's the tooltip. Because the tooltip that we implemented is UI view representable. And now we have the tip kit framework, so we're gonna use this. It's still not public, but we're gonna work on that. And it's gonna be the first example of the design system in which a component will have a different appearance because we want to leverage the native API. The idea is that to not go with the workaround when we can, even if we want to sacrifice the consistency. Also because consistency is great, but also giving to our users OS experience is important, right? So TipKit, for me, is going to become a standard for iOS apps. So we want to provide this experience to our iOS users.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I would have a small question. Why did you raise the minimum platform to iOS 14 instead of iOS 15?
I mean, I was pushing for iOS 17. So you ask why we updated to iOS 14 and not iOS 15, right? Okay. I guess your question comes from the knowledge that both platforms have the same devices support, right? Sorry, both OS have the same platform support, devices support. And this is true, and in fact, it's gonna make easier for us to decommission iOS 14 in favor of iOS 15, which is something that we want to do as soon as possible. However, keep in mind that this product is hard to, with this product, and 26 app, it's hard to just decommission like that, right? We want to make sure that this is the bank that everyone loves, right? So we want everyone to be able to use it. And while we were guaranteeing that as a jump from iOS 12 to iOS 15, we could have done the same, right? But at the time when we made this decision, all the metrics and the calculation that we made in our case, business case that we built, were easier to do on iOS 14 and were more convincing on iOS 14. Does it answer your question? No, you're not sure. Why does it answer your question?
I had the same question, and I went straight to iOS 15. We also have a big user base, and our POs wanted to support iOS 12 until there is no tomorrow. But in the case where the user can update from 14 to 15, technically, I don't see a reason why I would stick with iOS 14, because iOS 15 gives me much nicer frameworks and updates.
Yeah.
For example, UI button.
One more thing that I want to add is that, in my personal opinion, one thing is to make, analyze numbers between iOS 12 and iOS 14. And one other thing in our business case is to say, yeah, but our user can just upgrade the OS, right? A lot of people don't do that. We don't want to force them to just say, hey, use the latest OS if you want to use our app. Also because a lot of people have this mindset of saying, and then my battery will be drained. It's gonna use more memory, no, right? So iOS 14 for us was, yeah, but I'm not gonna disclose now all the reason why we did it. I just mentioned the design system part. Then there is the security, then there is all the rest in our business case. But for sure about the design system part, this is what I can tell, right? Like how convincing we can be. As I mentioned before, if I made the call, we will use iOS 17 now. It's super cool. We could also use a lot of scroll API, right? We have to wait. Next question.
Thanks for your talk. My question is, did you face any problem on the UI testing, and how did you handle it in case?
Yes. We had two cases in which we had we have a problem. This is because we were assigning the accessibility identifier to the SwiftUI view. And in our testing strategy, in this test, we were observing the accessibility label of that component. And apparently, it was not the same element as a trait. So we were looking for buttons with that label. And there was no label with that value. With that label. There was no button with that label. And what we did, it's pretty simple fix, right? Like to make sure that when we test, we use accessibility identifier. So in my experience, the accessibility identifier in our UI test is the most stable way to make sure that from the switch from UI kit to SwiftUI, we don't lose this matching. So yeah, the flakiness that we found was in when we were using not the accessibility identifier.
When migrating to SwiftUI, did you consider the architecture to be evaluated? Like, were you using the same architecture, or did you think about composite?
Yeah. But before I was talking to some of you, and there were a lot of questions about the architecture. So let's answer this question. Thank you. When we work on this migration, we had a mission was pretty well defined, which was we want to be architecture agnostic. So the design system will not accommodate any architecture. It was a choice. Also considering, I'm going to spend a few words about on architectures, that in our, I'm happy to share that in our community, we don't have one architecture. We don't have two architectures. Any segment, any group can basically choose the architecture that better suits the case that they want. And it's a choice that is a little bit different from a lot of other companies. And I love it because it's never boring to work at 1026, because every time that you have to review or change team or rotate, there is a completely different architecture. So you train your mind, and ideally the best is the best approach because you can find the trade-offs. And from my point of view, to introduce a new framework, that was also cool to not tie the way we were thinking of the framework to one architecture. And I think it's a winning strategy. I know there are other people from design system teams. I mean, I think the idea to have in the design system architecture agnostic is amazing. Still, sometimes we know that there is a prevalent architecture. So on top of that, we have some convenience way to yes, accommodate that architecture. But our kind of extensions are not part of the design system. Okay. One more. With
Yes, we have time for one more question, please.
Oh, yes, thank you very much for your presentations and for sharing your knowledge. I really respect your motivation and the path you've passed. But in my knowledge, I just touched SwiftUI a couple of years ago, and I come to conclusion that it's not so, production ready, not ready to be used in commercial way. And my question is, after all the challenges you've passed, after all the challenges that you find out, that you've recognized during your journey, don't you come to the same conclusion that it's not so good to be fully SwiftUI in production right now?
Is SwiftUI ready for production? It depends on your product. I want to say that if you have a product in which you really need a profound level of customization of UI components, and I didn't mention anything about animations, but if you want to have control on a low level on animation, in general, the low level approach, right? Because it's kind of the limitation of this framework. Everything is easy, few line of codes, but then if you want to really have control of something, you don't have it. So for our product, it works. There are pretty little workaround, as I mentioned, right? But it works. It's a good choice because then engineers love it. For us, we have again, we have much less line of code, and we can compose stuff, and it's much easier to implement it, to maintain it. I mean, we have a library that is much less big. It's not just about the line of code, of course, but I like that. I mean, the idea of having this modify and the composability approach and all of these environment values, while before it was so stressful all the time to reflect the changes from UI view, the backend view, the facade, having I mean, I showed you that monster, right? I don't think it's cool I'm a little bit ashamed to share that initializer, right? So this was a great opportunity. But coming to your question, production ready is a big fight on the web, on the socials, on Twitter, X. And I think the only answer is, it depends, and I'm kidding. The only answer is, it depends, and I said that, but on the product, on your real product, and if you want to focus on specific aspects, that's why you need a spike, I guess, on the migration, like we did, to understand the limitations. And if there are too many, like animations, control, and now in the latest API, you still can do a lot of stuff with animation and control it. You have a completion finally on animation, but we didn't. So imagine if we had to use it in any view. Maybe we would have a vote again, right? Okay.
So let's make another round of applause to Marco.